Greetings, fellow Trekkers and Trekkers. We'll look at Star Trek Deep Space Nine Season 6 now continues on with Far Beyond the Stars. Joseph Sisko, Captain Benjamin Sisko's father, has left Earth for the first time to visit his son and grandson in Deep Space Nine, but his timing couldn't be worse. Although the Federation is in firm control of the station, the Cardassian border is still a risky place for Federation ships to patrol. In particular, the USS Cortez has recently been destroyed, and even a 6-hour search by the USS Defiant failed to discover any survivors. That means Captain Quentin Swafford, a man Sisko knew well, is dead, and Sisko is distraught. Given that he introduced Swafford to his wife, he is beginning to despair of making any kind of difference in the war effort at all, and is seriously considering stepping down and letting someone else make the tough decisions. Joseph promises to support his son no matter what decision he makes, but warns him to think carefully before he does anything. As he discusses the news with his father, Sisko is distracted and puzzled when he sees a strange man walk past his office in 1950s Earth clothing. Dax, standing right outside Ops, insists she didn't see anyone, which only makes it a greater puzzle. Later, when walking down the corridor with Cassidy Yates, Sisko is again confused when a baseball player walks past and calls, "Hey Benny, catch the game?" Again, Yates is sure she didn't see anyone. When Sisko follows the man through a door, instead finds himself in the middle of a busy New York street and is immediately hit by a taxi. Dr. Bashir examines him in the infirmary and finds unusual synaptic potentials. His neural patterns look like they did when Sisko was having visions the year before. When Sisko takes a pad to examine the data for himself, he finds himself instead looking at a copy of Galaxy at a New York newsstand. What's more, Sisko, or rather Benny Russell, feels completely at home on the street. When Albert McLachlan comes around the corner, they walk off together to the office. The people Russell knows at the office and meets on the street are similar to the people Sisko knows on the station. They sound the same and look at least somewhat similar, but they are not the same people. The news vendor's not Nog. Macklin is not Miles O'Brien, and Kay Eden is not Kieran Reese. They are merely characters in a dream created from the likeness of his real-world friends. This point until Sisko wakes up, the story is told from Benny Russell's perspective, as the 1950s setting is a real world. When Russell and Macklin arrive at Incredible Tales, the science fiction magazine for which they work, the van writer Herbert Rossoff and editor Douglas Pabst engaged in the Battle of the Donuts, round 28, as Ian describes it. Ian herself has been experimenting with Red Rose Ready Tea, a pitcher of plain water becomes a pitcher of iced tea, the concept her husband Julius, as a self-respecting Englishman, finds appalling. Macklin is, as always, looking for matches to light his pipe, even though Russell just gave them to him. When the bickering and general subtle troubles ebbs, though, Pabst calls the meeting to order. The magazine's illustrator, Rory Ritterhouse, comes in bearing a stack of science fiction sketches to distribute to the pool of writers for the next month's stories. Russell's particularly taken with the drawing of a space station, basically a circle of pilots and 100-degree intervals, and a USAF DS/9 stenciled around the edge. He takes a sketch and offers to create an appropriate story to accompany it. Trouble starts, however, when Pabst announces that their publisher wants a group photo of the writing staff for the next issue, and Pabst suggests that Ian and Russell sleep late the morning it's taken. The public need to know that women and blacks are writing for Incredible Tales along with the white men. Rossoff sarcastically quips about the dangers of a Negro with a typewriter, and Russell is angry, but Pabst holds firm. There'll be no picture of Eden and no picture of Russell. It's not personal, Benny, but as far as the readers are concerned, Benny Russell is as white as they are. Let's just keep it that way, Pabst says matter-of-factly. That evening, as Russell leaves the office, Incredible Tales is located in the Arthur Trail building. The space station sketch is caught in a breeze and lands in the shoe of Bert Ryan, an NYPD detective with an attitude. Eastburn and Kevin Mulcahy are suspicious of a janitor dressed in a nice suit, but get back the drawing with, "This time we get out with a warning. Next time you won't be so lucky." Then, as he's almost home, Russell hears a preacher in a street corner who seems to be speaking directly to Benny. "Write those words, Brother Benny," the preacher advises. "Write the words of the gods, of the spirits, of the prophets." With these events fresh in his mind, Benny Russell sits down in his apartment before his typewriter with the space station picture frame and begins to write. Captain Benjamin Sisko sat looking out the window. Even as he writes the words, Benny sees reflection in his own window. Only he has on a curious uniform instead of a shirt, and his tying glasses are gone. He presses on with his story well into the night. When the story is finally finished some days later, he shows it to his fiancée Cassie at the dinner where she waits tables. While he's sipping his coffee at the counter, famous baseball player Willie Hawkins comes in and flirts, only half jokingly, with Cassie while saying hello to Russell. Buster also encounters Jimmy, a street kid. First, heard Hawkins tell how white people wouldn't want him living in their neighborhoods. Buster hears Jimmy's skepticism about the new story. What's more, Jimmy's tried upon a watch he found, and Russell's cautions about him getting in trouble don't seem to do any good. On the other hand, the Tigers of Incredible Tales loves the story, which Russell has titled Deep Space Nine. In fact, it's the best thing Pabst secretary Darlene Kursky has ever read. Russell, exhausted from lack of sleep, is worried that he's hallucinating. While Kate Eden is complimenting the strong female character in the story, he takes off his glasses for a moment and sees her wearing a red uniform and strange ridges on her nose. Unfortunately, Pabst himself isn't able to print this story. It's not believable, he insists, since it features a Negro space station captain for a hero. Pabst asks Russell to make the captain white, but Anthony tells him that it's not what he wrote. Pabst tells Russell that it is his call. Russell is sitting at the restaurant with a cigarette in his hand, telling about his story, and Jim is remotely surprised. And Cassie suggests it may be a sign he should stop writing and go into the restaurant business with her, owning and running the diner. When Hawkins comes in and grabs Russell by the shoulder, he's surprised to see ridges on his forehead and strange clothing. He jumps off the stool in surprise. When he looks up again, it's just Hawkins, asking if Russell had seen the game. Russell leaves, troubled by the vision. That evening, he comes to see the preacher again. Walk with the prophet's brother Benny, he insists. Write the words that will lead us out of the darkness and onto the path of righteousness. Russell rushes home and sits down before his typewriter once again. Concentrating so hard, he even forgets about his deal with Cassie. John is sleeping with a stack of pages in his hand, a new Ben Cisco story, and tries to get him to relax by taking a spin around the dance floor in the living room. He started once again when he says he's so dancing in a strange room and to hear Cassie talking about the Dominion. He flashes back and forth between his living room and space station, seeing things from his own story. As Russell questions his own sanity, Pabst insists he's certifiable. It's sort of six sequels to the Deep Space Nine story Pabst already refused to publish. Michael makes a suggestion that could salvage everything, though. Make the story, at least the first story, a dream. If a poor Negro would dream of such a future, the story might work. Pabst grudgingly admits, and Russell agrees that anything would be better than not publishing the story at all. Even as Russell and Cassie are celebrating the story getting published, however, another tragedy strikes. They encounter the preacher who warns, the path of the prophet sometimes leads into darkness and pain. Just gunshots ring through the air. Russell rushes forward and invites a random Mulcahy have shot and killed Jimmy. When Russell tries to fight his way to him, the two cops begin to beat him up. Russell sees ridges on Ryan's neck and long thin hairs on Mulcahy's face. Russell has been badly beaten and is walking with a cane, but a few weeks later on the day his story is finally published, he makes his way to the office anyway, with Cassie's encouragement. The staff are happy to see Russell for the first time since his beating. They also reveal that Macklin has sold a novel, and Russell is very happy for his friend. Then Pabst arrives, but with no magazine. Pabst explains that there's not going to be an edition of Incredible Tales that month. Apparently, the entire run was pulled because the publisher, Mr. Stone, felt the issue didn't meet their usual high standards. Russell, already knowing the truth, asked what the publisher didn't like. The artwork? The layout? But Russell, already starting to break down, answers his own question. The magazine was pulled because the hero of Deep Space Nine is a colored man. Pabst tells Russell that he knows it isn't right, but he fiercely defends the decision, saying that it's not about what's right, it's about what is. This leads into further bad news. The publisher decided that Russell's services are no longer required. The rest of the staff recoil in shock, and even the more inflammable Julius Eden is horrified. Russell tells Pabst that he can't be fired because he quits, before sweeping the contents of a nearby table on the floor in anger as he begins to have a nervous breakdown. He is devastated that everyone is attempting to deny both himself and Ben Cisco, that the publishers are attempting to destroy the story, but he says, sobbing, that they cannot destroy the idea. Ben Cisco, Deep Space Nine, and all the people from this story, they exist in his head, and that's of everyone who read it. You can pulp a story, but you cannot destroy an idea. Don't you understand? That's ancient knowledge. You cannot destroy an idea. That future I created, and it's real. Don't you understand? It is real. I created it, and it's real. Russell finally collapses, sobbing and cradled by his former co-workers. As he's carted away in an ambulance, Benny Russell finds the preacher sitting beside himself and sees himself in a strange uniform. Who am I? He asks quietly. You're the dreamer, the preacher answers him, and the dream. Captain Benjamin Sisko wakes up in the infirmary with Cassidy, Jake, Joseph, and Dr. Bashir standing over him, happy to see him awake. He was unconscious for only a few minutes. Bashir reports his neural patterns are returning to normal. As Joseph gets ready to leave, Sisko, sitting on a couch in his quarters, says his dream has encouraged him to stay on DS9 and keep fighting the good fight. He's looking to his father, but he wonders whether their world really is the real world or just a vision. And somewhere far beyond the stars, Benny Russell really exists. He stares out the window and sees a reflection of himself wearing Benny's clothes. That's interesting. So let's take a look at some background information from this episode. A working title of this episode was The Cold and Distant Stars. Virtually the same working title as was used for Past Tense, Part 1. Alright, let's take a look at some production notes from this. Now let's take a look at some production notes. For the art department, working on this episode was a thrilling experience. Quote, the art department was very excited about what we were going to be doing for Far Beyond the Stars. End quote, reminisced John Eves. Quote, we all grown up with the wacky science fiction stories and movies of the 50s, and it was great to have the opportunity to pay homage to the past. End quote. Far Beyond the Stars was a particularly different episode for Star Trek Deep Space Nine to work on, necessitating a lot of collaborative effort. John Eves remembered, quote, Chuck Drexler, Mike, and Denise Okuda, and Anthony Fredrickson were all very busy working on the magazine covers and background art. Jim Van Over created the 50s style version of the Deep Space Nine station. Fred Zimmerman and Tony Bro designed these fabulous offices representing 50s New York City. Laura Richards had a field day finding circa 50s decor, and Herman Zimmerman and Randy McLevin were busy doing the production design of the whole project. I got the task of doing the pack of drawings that the stories were to be written from. End quote. The silver item on Herbert Roth's desk, which he places in a case as Thorns Quid, is an actual Hugo Award. It was on to a production by Rick Sternbach, who won it for Best Professional Artist. In terms of why Avery Brooks was chosen to direct this episode, supervising producer Steve Oster explained, quote, Ira Steve Bear and I discussed the possibility of Avery directing, knowing he was going to be in every frame of film. We don't like the combination, because it's very hard to direct yourself. However, this was a story about racism and prejudice, and we felt very strongly that it would be wrong if it came from a bunch of people who didn't necessarily know about that experience. We knew that it was imperative to the story and imperative to the integrity of television for it to be done right. End quote. Additionally, Oster reflected, quote, originally, on our director's schedule for that season, Avery wasn't scheduled to direct Far Beyond the Stars. And I think as we talked about it more, it became clear we can't not have Avery direct that episode, because it's all about representing the struggle in our country's past, and in some instances, the present. End quote. Regarding how the invitation itself was given to him, Brooks himself recalled, quote, Ira Bear came to me. He said, I have this idea. I want to know whether you're interested, because you'll be in front of the camera. But I also want to know if you want to direct. I said, well, okay, end quote. Avery Brooks was pleased to be given the assignment of directing this episode, quote, because of the writing of it, because we talked about 1953, because it talked about who we are or who we were, this idea of this brown man writing in science fiction, I thought that was very clever, end quote, he enthused. Of course, one of the tasks Avery Brooks had directed this episode was making its 1950 setting appear convincing. Michael Dorn stated, quote, Avery spent a lot of time and effort to make it look like the 50s, end quote. Upon filming the scene in which Benny Russell falls to the ground, Avery Brooks became extraordinarily involved in delivering his performance. Ira Stevenberg commented, quote, Avery was so deeply into the character that he went down and stayed down, end quote. First assistant director Lou Race recalled shooting on the scene, quote, he falls to the floor, and I'm saying, well, I got a cut, but I don't actually let this go on, end quote. None of us are related, quote, The call cut, and he's not coming out. And I know what that feels like as an actor. You're gone, and he was gone. End quote. Adelaide Race quote. If I stood there half an hour, I think he would have kept on. He was very committed to that part and very committed to that scene. End quote. All right. Now let's take a look at some other trivia from this episode. This is the first time Cassidy has appeared since Rapture in early season 5, despite her close bond to the Ciscos in that episode. The line gap between that installment and this one was due to Penny Johnson's obligations to the Larry Sanders Show. This is the only episode in Star Trek directed by the episode's lead actor to make the actor's character heavily. Star Trek V The Final Frontier has a similar distinction, being directed by leading actor William Shatner. Similarly, Star Trek III The Search for Spock was directed by Leonard Nimoy, though his version of Spock had less screen time than the also Nimoy directed Star Trek IV The Voyage Home. Usually, when an actor directs, the character has a very small role, such as Brooks's role in Tribunal, Renee Auberjonois' role in Profit Motive, Alexander Siddig's role in Business as Usual, Patrick Stewart's role in Theory, etc. Rather than, as in this episode, the same person directing also playing a prominent lead role. This is the only Star Trek episode to include the N-word racial slur in this episode. It is said by Jake's character Jimmy, it references his belief that black people will never get into space except to shine white people's shoes. Also gives the utterance "for Christ's sake" by the character like Douglas Pabst. Both of these have been censored in re-airings. The song playing over the first Benny scene, The Arkham Newspaper Boy, is The Glowworm, written by Paul Link in 1909. It was recorded in 1952 by the vocal group Mills Brothers and reached number 1 in the pop charts that same year. Far Beyond the Stars is almost possibly referencing the story surrounding the production of the comics Judgment Day, written by Al Feldstein and drawn by Joe Orlando, in which an astronaut working for the Galactic Republic, an equivalent of the Federation, assesses a plan of robots for joining and ultimately rejects their candidature due to their color-based racism. In the very last panel of the comic, the astronaut is supposed to be black of skin, with the text reading, quote, "And inside the ship, the man removed his space helmet and shook his head, and the instrument light made the beads of perspiration on his dark skin twinkle like distant stars," end quote. The Comic Code Administrator, Judge Murphy, required the editor Gaines to censor the black character. Fields reporter replied to the judge, quote, "For God's sake, Judge Murphy, that's the whole point of the goddamn story," end quote. The story was eventually printed uncensored despite the judge's opposition, but the magazine suffered from this daring act. When Benny lists famous writers in their works, he mentions the 1940 Richard Wright novel Native Son. In the same year as Far Beyond the Stars, Avery Brooks appeared in the Tony Kane film American History X, which Brooks's character also had a strong affinity for Wright's novel and introduced it into the school curriculum. The quote from the Bible at the end of the episode is from 2 Timothy 4:7. The full passage reads, quote, "For I am already on the point of being sacrificed. The time of my departure has come. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Henceforth there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award me on that day, and not only to me, but also to all who have loved his appearing." John Neef said in an interview that he was in charge of the Deep Space Nine drawing getting its footprint, and to accomplish this, he saw a woman in the corridors wearing combat boots and asked her to stamp on it. He didn't realize it until it was so later, but it was Jerry Wright in costume, and she was filming the Killing Game Part 2 at that time that was part of her French Resistance outfit. Okay then, interesting. So overall, this is a really darn good episode, and yeah, it's definitely another fan favorite, and definitely one that is high on my list of top favorite episodes, so yeah. So overall, I give Far Beyond the Stars 5 warp cores out of 5. Well, anyway, tune in as we to the next episode, One Little Ship. So, until then, live long and prosper, everybody.